the inner critic is not an enemy. The inner critic has good intentions. The inner critic is a benevolent protector. And the inner critic is trying to protect you from some external perpetrator that created a core wound of shame, humiliation, embarrassment, or a core belief I'm not enough, I'm too much. It's actually trying to protect a pain or a core wound that lives inside of us from a long time ago.
In a world moving faster than our minds were designed to handle, mental health is becoming one of the defining challenges of our time. Welcome to Mental Health in a Modern World with holistic health practitioner Greg Schmaus. After overcoming severe anxiety and OCD in his own life, Greg dedicated the past decade to helping others heal through a fully integrated approach to mental health, combining lifestyle coaching, psycho-emotional healing, mindfulness, and archetypal work. Over the years, he's facilitated thousands of sessions, guiding people back to peace, clarity, and a deeper connection with themselves. Each week, Greg shares powerful solo insights, conversations with leading voices in holistic healing, and immersive live coaching sessions that take you inside the healing process itself. New episodes every Friday. Follow the show and start reclaiming sovereignty over your mind in a modern world. Here's Greg.
Hi, this is Greg Schmaus, and welcome back to Mental Health in a Modern World. Today is a very important solo episode, and this is a topic I've wanted to cover for a while now, so I'm very grateful to dive into this with you today, which is healing the inner critic. And the inner critic is one of the most common challenges that I see in my one-on-one coaching practice, and something that I would say pretty much anyone that has had a childhood, has had, a life experience, a life journey, probably once upon a time or consistently has struggled with an inner critic. And there's many important reasons that we're going to get into, but it's just such an essential topic because one thing that I also find is in the self-help and therapy world, the inner critic is very misunderstood. And a lot of the inner critic is demonized and is approached in a way that often actually does more harm than good. And a lot of times can even inflame the inner critic when we approach it in the wrong way. So today, my intention is to dive into what the inner critic really is, why it's there, and how we can begin to work with it in a way that actually begins to create more space, turns the volume down, and allows us to move into a new dimension within ourselves. So the inner critic, very simply, is an internal voice that judges or criticizes. So it's a voice within ourselves that uses judgment and criticism for various reasons. And we're going to get into what those reasons are. Unfortunately, most self-help sees the inner critic as an enemy and tries to either get rid of it or replace it with positive thinking. And I am all for positive thinking, but one of the things that happens is when you always are trying to replace a negative with a positive, you create more polarization. You create this inner conflict between the dark and the light, between the good and the bad, between the negative and the positive. And you create this pattern of resistance, this aversion to the negative and attachment to the positive. And remember, there's an old saying, what you resist persists. So a lot of times the thing we're actually fighting against, we're feeding more energy into it because whatever you push against always pushes back. And so we're going to approach the inner critic today from a very different perspective, one that creates a lot more ease, one that is a lot more gentle, and one that is a lot more benevolent for all parts within ourselves. Now, it's important to remember that no child is ever born with an inner critic. So we're actually going to start going all the way back to the moment of birth. So no child comes into this world with an inner critic consciously. No child is born into this world and looks at themselves in the mirror and says, you look a little chunky today. You look a little off today. You look a little overweight today. No baby is ever looking at itself through that lens. And so because no children, no babies, are ever born with an inner critic, it means that all judgments and all criticisms are borrowed. All judgments and all criticisms are inherited, right? Nothing is original within ourselves when it comes to judgment and criticism. All judgments and all criticisms are borrowed and inherited. That's an important fact to really understand. And so, with that, all inner critics are born from outer critics, right? We learn and we develop an inner critic in response to some outer critic that we felt judged, criticized, or shamed by, right? So we have this experience with an outer critic, which creates a core wound. It could be the core wound of shame, humiliation, embarrassment, or we create beliefs that I'm not enough, there's something wrong with me, I'm not enough of this, I'm too much of that. And so we have this experience, which is very often more cases than not starting with a parent, a mother or father figure or a primary caretaker, that we experience some criticism from, some judgment from. And we experience a wound of shame, humiliation, embarrassment, disconnection, a belief I'm not enough, I'm too much, I'm this, I'm that. And so all inner critics are born out of the experience of an outer critic, which is why all criticism, all judgment is borrowed and inherited. Now, the inner critic, which is born out of the experience of an outer critic, is in response a protector, right? So the inner critic is there to act as a protective shield from the outer critic. And you might ask, well, how does criticizing myself protect me from an external critic? Here's an analogy. There's many ways in which it happens. If you punched me in the left arm, it would hurt. It might hurt pretty badly. But if I punched myself repeatedly in the left arm, constantly, day in and day out, to the point where I lose feeling or sensation in my left arm, and then you go and strike my left arm, I'm actually not going to feel it as much. So because I inflict the same wound upon myself, I actually create some immunity to you wounding me. So the pain of the blow of your criticism is actually lessened when I actually judge or criticize or wound myself in the same way. So one of the ways that we protect ourselves from the external perpetrator is we develop an internal perpetrator. And the inner perpetrator is doing the same thing that the external perpetrator did as a way of creating immunity from the pain of the blow from outside. So that's number one, is the inner critic is a protector who inflicts the same wound as a way of creating immunity from more wounding from the outside. The second piece is the inner critic, as a result of the shame, humiliation, embarrassment, and not enoughness that we experience due to the outer critic, the inner critic will become almost like a motivator of I'm going to judge, criticize, and shame you as a way of trying to motivate you to be perfect and better enough to make you invulnerable to other people's criticism. So the inner critic becomes almost like the whip that is whipping the horse or the animal to go faster, to push harder, to do more, etc. Right? So the inner critic becomes the whip motivating you to become better and better and better till eventually you are invulnerable to criticism. Now, it's a losing battle because that actually ends up doing more harm than good. But you could see how the inner critic has different tactics as a form of protection. The other piece is the inner critic will often create loyalty or alliance with the outer critic as a means of easing the pain. For example, if I'm criticizing myself in a certain way, and then you criticize me in the same way, we're kind of actually in agreement. So the inner critic is actually creating an unconscious agreement with its perpetrators as a way of creating some sort of loyalty or alliance, and that also eases the pain. In addition to that, a child's sense of self is totally dependent, initially, on its experience of mom and dad, right? So mom and dad are the reference point for how the child comes to know itself, especially as it's starting to grow and develop an identity. So, for example, when a child sees mom or dad as upset, the child immediately says, Mom and dad are upset with me. If the child sees mom or dad as angry, the child says mom and dad are angry with me. If the child is experiencing mom or dad as judgmental, the child immediately says, well, if mom and dad are judgmental, it means that I must not be enough. So you see how the child develops a story, a narrative, a conclusion, and an identity, belief systems, based on how mom or dad experience the child. Essentially, the child sees itself through mom or dad's eyes. And a lot of times, if there was judgment or criticism, we see ourselves through the critical eye of mom or dad. And that becomes a contract that we have unconsciously to see ourselves through the eyes of mom or dad. And so within these contracts, this inner critic stays very alive in our unconscious. The reason I want to lay all this out to start is so you can really see that the inner critic is not an enemy. The inner critic has good intentions. The inner critic is a benevolent protector. And the inner critic is trying to protect you from some external perpetrator that created a core wound of shame, humiliation, embarrassment, or a core belief I'm not enough, I'm too much, etc. So the inner critic is actually paradoxically, even though it can create pain, it's actually trying to protect a pain or a core wound that lives inside of us from a long time ago. Now, a lot of times these core wounds happened when we were quite young. Maybe we were 5 years old. Maybe we were 6 years old. Maybe we were 7 years old or even younger. And so the inner critic on a deeper level, because a lot of these parts in the psyche, they don't really exist in time the way we do. Especially when there's trauma, they get frozen in time. The inner critic is very often protecting a 5-year-old part of us, a 6-year-old part of us, a 7-year-old part of us. And so this inner critic, you might be 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, is still trying to protect a 5-year-old inside of you. And so that inner voice that is actually driving most people's behaviors day in and day out, even and especially people that are very successful, are very often driven by their inner critics, professional athletes and people that are very successful in the business world. A lot of their success is built upon their inner critic. It's built upon their not enoughness. And so they have to overcompensate by becoming so incredibly wealthy and successful to try and make up for that not enoughness, but it never actually fills the void because that 5-year-old part still carries that core wound. And so we can actually build a whole empire in business and in the outer world based on the motivation of our inner critic to try and prove that we are enough. But unfortunately, inner work is the only way, it's the only path for us to really heal that core wound. But you can see that you might be 50, 60 years old, and the inner critic is still trying to protect a vulnerable, shamed, humiliated 5-year-old inside of you. And so this is why when it comes to the inner critic, we don't want to try and get rid of it. We don't want to demonize it. We don't want to make it this negative enemy inside of us. And we don't want to just try and replace it with positive thinking. We have to really see the benevolence of it, the loyalty of it, the goodness in it, and the role that it's really trying to play for you. And we want to do what's called befriending. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to guide you through a little practice, even just 5 minutes, a little meditative practice where we can get to know our inner critic. So if you're able to, if you're not driving a car, operating heavy machinery, just take a moment and go inward. Take a moment and go inside and close your eyes. Take a breath or two from your belly. And just get curious about this inner critic. And we're going to call this inner critic a part and a protector part. And see where you might find this inner critic, this protector part, somewhere in or around your body or mind. You might notice it in your mind. You might find it in your body somewhere. So just take a moment and find where this inner critic is in or around your body or mind. And just trust wherever you're led. If you're having trouble, just ask the inner critic where it resides inside of you and notice where your attention goes. And then just beginning to focus your attention on it and seeing what you notice about it. How big or small is it? How heavy or light is it? How close or far do you feel from it? How loud is it, volume wise, from 1 to 10? And anything else that you notice about the inner critic when you focus on it. And notice how you feel towards it. Do you feel love, compassion, curiosity, connection, calmness? Or do you feel any sort of judgment or resistance to it, like you want it to go away or you don't like it? And if it's anything other than love, connection, curiosity, compassion, anything other than what we would call self energy, higher self, ask those other parts to open up space for you, to just give you a few minutes to really get to know this part without resistance, judgment, or interference. And see if those parts are willing to just give you a little space just to be with the critic from a place of self. And you'll feel them relax back. So you have more heart centered space for the critic. And then ask the critic if there's anything it wants you to know about itself or the role that it's playing for you. And without trying to think about it, just allow yourself to receive whatever it has to say. Anything about the role that it's playing or anything it wants you to know about itself. What's it trying to do for you? How long has it been in this extreme role for? How old were you when it started in this role? How old does it think you are now? What is it afraid would happen if it didn't criticize you anymore? What is it afraid would happen if it didn't play this role for you anymore? And is there a core wound that this critic is trying to protect? And once you've gotten to know this critic a little bit and the role that it's playing for you, just thank it for its benevolence, for its protection, and for what it's tried to do, even though it's challenging sometimes. And see how the critic receives that acknowledgement as you befriend it. And just ask it what it might need in order to open up more space in you, to quiet down the criticism, or to shift into a new role of relating, a new way of relating. Is there anything the critic might need in order to make a transition? Or does it still feel like it needs to be this harsh or this extreme? Just see what it says. Then just thank it for sharing with you and that you'll follow up with it and continue building this relationship. And then whenever you feel ready, just bringing yourself back and opening up the eyes. So as you can see, this critic is not bad. This critic is not wrong. This critic is not an enemy. It's a benevolent protector that's protecting a core wound, an unhealed emotion, or an exiled part that is still carrying a lot of pain or trauma. And so the first thing we want to do is, in parts work, what's called unblend and befriend. Unblend means we separate ourselves from the part. So it's you, self, part, here. If you're just listening to the audio, I was using my hands to demonstrate the unblending process. And then once we unblend, we befriend. Befriending means it's not the enemy. It's a part that we see in a benevolent way. It's a part that we see the good intentions that it has, and it's a part that we make friends with it, right? So it's no longer an enemy that we're in resistance to or in conflict with. And so once we do this, we realize that these parts have contracts. These parts have contracts that they carry from a very young age, going back a long, long ways. And contract work is work that I learned from one of my mentors, Sarah Payton, who does a lot of family constellation work, resonant healing work, and is also a neuroscientist. And unconscious contracts are agreements that we make within ourselves and with others. And an agreement would sound something like this. A contract would sound something like this. I, Greg, solemnly swear to my essential self that I will judge and criticize myself in order to motivate myself to be good enough in which I'm invulnerable to other people's criticism, no matter the cost to myself. Or I, Greg, solemnly swear to my essential self that I will judge and criticize myself in order to protect myself from my judgmental or critical parent, no matter the cost to myself. So you can see in this contract, it's worded very specifically. I, Greg, solemnly swear to my essential self. That means I'm making an agreement with myself that I will judge and criticize myself. So there's a behavior there, right? I will judge and criticize myself in order to protect myself from my critical parent, in order to become invulnerable to criticism. So there's the benefit. No matter the cost to myself, there's the cost. So in every contract, there's 4 ingredients. There's an agreement, a behavior, a benefit, and a cost. And it's really, really powerful to write out and state the contract of any critical or sabotaging behavior that you might struggle with. Because by naming the contract, you can see that number one, it's an agreement. Number two, there's a behavior. Number three, there's always a benefit to the behavior. And number four, there's always a cost to it. And so within these contracts, we identify those four ingredients: the agreement, the behavior, the benefit, and the cost. And the truth is, if we weren't benefiting from any sabotaging behavior, we wouldn't do it. Whether it's the inner critic, self-judgment, patterns of addiction, or other patterns of self-sabotage. We always benefit from behaviors, even if they seem negative in orientation. So we identify the agreement, the behavior, the benefit, and the cost. And by identifying the benefit, we identify the unmet need that is getting met through the behavior, and we also identify the core wound that is being protected as a result of the behavior. And so that gives us almost like this breadcrumb trail if we know where we need to go to do some deeper healing or some deeper exploration. And then once we've done that, then we can release the contract, the agreement, or the vow. Right? So what I would invite you to do as a follow-up and as an integration from this episode is spend a little time unblending and befriending your inner critic, just like we did in that short meditation practice. And then also see if you can write out a contract, which would say, I, then state your name, solemnly swear to my essential self that I will state the behavior, judge or criticize myself in order to, what is the benefit that you're getting by doing it, or what is the protector trying to achieve in order to protect the core wound of shame and humiliation, in order to protect myself from outer critics, in order to be good enough to be invulnerable to criticism, no matter the cost to myself. And see if you can work with the part, unblend and befriend, and state the contract, and see what that does for you. See if that opens up some space for you to begin to relate to the critic in a new way. And just by relating to it in a new way, it will create some shifts inside of you. It will turn the volume down. It will create less polarization, less inner conflict, and it will allow a little bit more of a sense of wholeness and spaciousness within you. The other piece I just want to touch on is our modern world. Remember the show's Mental Health in a Modern World. Our modern world is filled with information. And the rate of information consumption is greater than it's ever been in human history. The average person today consumes more information in one day than our ancestors did in a whole lifetime, which is very scary. Now, the rate of information consumption is outpacing the rate of integration, which means the rate that you consume information is a lot faster than the rate that you're integrating, embodying, or applying the information, right? So the rate of consumption is faster than the rate of integration or application or embodiment. It's kind of like eating or consuming more food than your digestive system can digest, metabolize, assimilate, and eliminate. And what happens when you consume more information than you're able to integrate is you create this sense of I know better, but I'm not doing better. That creates an inner critic. So the other piece I want to share with you is be very careful with over-consuming more information than you can effectively apply, integrate, and embody, because that will create more of an inner critic, more of a shame cycle, and will actually become a perpetuating pattern of self-sabotage. So the inner critic and the saboteur archetype always go together and they feed each other. Most people think that they criticize themselves because they sabotage. A lot of times people sabotage themselves to give themselves more things to criticize. So it creates what's called a negative feedback loop. So my invitation to you, other than really understanding the origins of it, unblending from it, befriending it, and identifying the contract, is be very mindful of the information consumption and the rate of consumption versus the rate of integration, application, and embodiment. And the last thing is, remember, whenever you're seeing yourself through the eyes of criticism, you're seeing yourself through the critical eye of someone else. You're seeing yourself through the eyes of your critical mother, your critical father, your critical priest, your critical rabbi, your critical teacher, your critical coach. And so remember that whenever there's an inner critic, there's always an external critic. And the inner critic is the protector against the external critic. So we unblend, we befriend, we identify the contract, and we open up space to begin to see ourselves with fresh eyes. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you liked it, please subscribe. Please share it with anyone that you feel would benefit from this content, which is most people. So please share this episode. I want to spread the love and share this content with people that really need it, because I truly believe that at this time in human history, mental health in a modern world is really the absolute essential, because the stakes are quite high right now. The rates of mental illness are quite high. And we kind of need all hands on deck to share the love, to spread the healing, and to be an example of mental health in a modern world. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to take a deeper dive, my online program, Healing the Mind, A Journey to Wholeness, is a great 21-day program. It's my flagship mental health program that takes a fully holistic and integrative approach to mental health. So if you're interested in that, you can go to healing4d.com/HTM and use the code podcast at checkout to save 20% off. I also have my online program, Healing Your Core Archetypes, A Journey of Empowerment, which goes into the 7 core archetypes that are at the root of the healing journey. And healing the inner critic is a huge piece of those 7 archetypes. And so we go into the saboteur, the victim, the prostitute, the child, the mother, the father, the imago Dei. All of these relate to the inner critic. So if you want to take a deep dive into some archetypal healing, you can go to healing4d.com/HCA for Healing Your Core Archetypes, HCA, and also use the code podcast to save 20% off. If you're interested in some one-on-one coaching, you can go to my website, healing4d.com. You can reach out to me directly. And if you just want to set up a coaching session with me to get started, you can go to calendly.com/healing4d, and you can set up a session with me there. And I look forward to sharing more with you in next week's episode. Have a beautiful week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.